Hi, welcome to another issue of Counterpunch with Trevor Loudon, the show that details the rapidly unfolding world communist revolution. Please like the show, share the show, subscribe to epochtv. Today's episode is why Joe Biden will not really defend Ukraine. I expect to get some pushback for this, but I urge people to do their own research, and I think my conclusions will bear out. We need to understand right off the top that modern Russia is an extension of the Soviet Union. Vladimir Putin is not a leader as traditionally think of as in the West. He is chosen by the real leaders, the heads of intelligence services, the underground communist networks, etc. He was chosen the same way that Gorbachev was chosen, or Andropov was chosen, or Brezhnev was chosen. This is not a crazy man seeking personal power. This is a man chosen by the elites of his country to lead the world into war, a war of conquest, what they believe will be the final push to establish world communism on the planet. So what we're seeing in Ukraine is not just to gain a bit of territory, it is the first kinetic step of World War III. We've been in World War III since World War II, but now it's going to start to go more kinetic because the forces of Russia and China realize that NATO is very divided and the United States is the weakest it has been in decades. This is the time to make the push, especially before the midterm elections in 2022, which will probably return more conservative Republicans to power in the US Senate and the US Congress, and would put a lot of damper on Biden's foreign policy, etc. Think about it, would Vladimir Putin or Russia do what they have done and set the whole world against them almost, if this was just for a little bit of land in Ukraine, or this was to make sure Ukraine doesn't join NATO? Now I think they're going for the whole enchilada. They will attempt to take Ukraine, then the Baltic states. That will put them on a collision course with the United States and NATO. At that point, I think America could be forced into a war which it's very ill-equipped to fight right now, or it will be basically forced to cede the world balance of power to Russia and China. That's what we're facing right now, and that will mean the inevitable advance of world communism and the defeat of freedom around the world. That's what we're looking at. So why do I think Biden won't make a stand? Why do I think Biden won't defend Ukraine? Well, he had the opportunity to do it earlier. He okayed Russia supplying Germany with energy. That put Ukraine at a big disadvantage. It made Germany, the strongest European country in NATO, dependent on Russia. Biden helped that. He signaled to the world that a small incursion into Ukraine would not meet a military response. That was all the green light the Russian leadership needed to go into Ukraine.
And it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, etc.
He has put some sanctions on. There's been some sanctions coming up from America, very reluctant, most of them. Biden has now finally banned the importation of Russian oil into America, but he wants to get that oil instead from Iran and Venezuela, which are both allied to Russia. So he'll deny the communists revenue on one hand, and he'll give the allies of the communist revenues on the other. Send his executive orders effectively shut down a lot of American energy production. Under President Trump, America was energy independent and could export energy to Europe. It could basically help Ukraine or help Europe so that Russia couldn't really blackmail them or have the influence that it does today. Well, that all went away under Biden. So now America is dependent on getting energy from its enemies. Europe is dependent on getting energy from its enemies. This is a very, very important thing. But let's look at Biden's background a bit. He was sold as a moderate Democrat. But if you really look at his past, it has been anything but moderate, especially on foreign policy. He was one of the most left-wing senators in the United States. When Reagan was trying to stop communism in the Soviet Union, Biden was going to visit Soviet leaders. When Reagan was trying to stop communism in Latin America, Biden was one of his biggest opponents. It was Biden, John Kerry, and Ted Kennedy that opposed Reagan most staunchly in the US Senate. When it comes to foreign policy, Biden has always been on the far left. A little bit further back in history, in 1972, Biden was a 29-year-old city councillor in Wilmington, Delaware. He decided to run for US Senate against a 4-term Republican incumbent with an 80% approval rating in a state that had never elected a Democrat statewide at that point. You'd think that would be a suicide mission. But Biden won because he had the backing of a very important but very shadowy group called the Council for a Livable World. Look them up online. They're still there right now. They are still calling for disarmament, American disarmament. They're still electing US senators and congressmen. They've endorsed several for this upcoming election. But they are the people who got Biden elected. And the president of the Council for a Livable World in 1972, the man who personally got behind Biden, got him money, got him endorsements, got him volunteers, got him elected, was a very corrupt senator from Tennessee called Albert Gore Sr. We've all heard of his son, Al Gore Jr., who stood for US president in 2000 and apparently invented the internet and global warming. But anyway, Albert Gore Sr. was a senator from Tennessee. At that time, he was president of the Council for a Livable World. And he regarded Biden as a very promising, progressive young man. Well, Albert Gore Sr. was the protege of a man called Armand Hammer. Armand Hammer was a very wealthy businessman, the head of Occidental Petroleum. He was the son of an American Communist Party member, Julius Hammer. Armand Hammer was regarded in many circles by the FBI as the leading Soviet agent in America right through the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. He was Moscow's man in America. He helped to keep the Bolshevik Revolution alive, and the FBI was always trying to shut him down, but Albert Gore Sr. protected Armand Hammer from the FBI from his position in the US Senate. So effectively, Joe Biden got his job because of the protege of a Soviet agent. But if you look at the Council for a Livable World, it was set up in 1962 by a man called Leo Szilard, a Hungarian. He was a supporter of Bela Kun's communist revolution, which broke out in Hungary just after World War I. When that failed, Szilard came to Germany, then the United States. He became a top nuclear physicist. He was one of the senior men in the Manhattan Project, the super secret project that developed the atomic weapon that was used to defeat Japan after World War II. And it was full of communists. Leaking like a sieve, they gave America's atom bomb secrets to the Soviet Union. Anyway, after the war, Leo Szilard became an international peace campaigner. He participated and set up the famous Pugwash conferences where Soviet scientists and politicians would mingle with Western leftists, and it was all about peace and disarmament, but mainly American disarmament. Because the Soviet goal was then, as it is now, to disarm America so the Soviets could defeat America in a nuclear exchange or blackmail the United States into surrender. In 1962, Szilard sets up the Council for a Livable World. It was a PAC. It got some money and it started funding candidates. Almost all Democrats, the occasional left-wing Republican, but almost all Democrats. And they targeted small states, targeted Senate races in small states, because senators negotiate treaties. They're very, very powerful people. And you can elect a US senator for very little money in a small state like Rhode Island or New Hampshire or Vermont or Maine, etc. And that's where they focused. Well, it was revealed in 1994 by a man called Pavel Sudoplatov, a former top-ranking Soviet intelligence officer under Stalin and the spy chief Beria, that Leo Szilard was a fully recruited Soviet agent, and that he'd been told to stop his spying because he could get caught, the FBI was on his tail, instead use his political influence to work for US nuclear disarmament to the advantage of the Soviet Union. The council began modestly. It funded socialist-leaning Senate candidates and low-budget elections in small states. These grateful new senators would then be lobbied by the council to vote to reduce US military spending and cut nuclear arms programs at every possible opportunity.
Council for a Livable World has been endorsing candidates since 1962. We endorse in races where the person we endorse has a strong chance of winning, has a good positions on our issues, and is running against someone whose positions we don't agree with.
So tell me how the Council for a Livable World aided the Soviet cause. Well, first of all, they had about a 100-degree correlation between their line and the Soviet line, and always being a reliable, quote-unquote, neutral peace activist voice out there to blast any efforts to improve American defense and to pretty much demand everything that the Soviets were demanding without sounding like they were Soviet agents.
In 50 years, the Council has funded over 200 Congress members.
I do want to thank the Council for a Livable World.
And 130 senators, including over 40 of the current Democratic delegation.
And I want to thank so much the supporters of Council for a Livable World.
I'm very proud to have the support of the Council for a Livable World.
Thank you to the Council for being such a great friend to me from the very beginning.
Thank you for the invaluable support you provide to candidates like me.
The Council for a Livable World has funded Senators Tim Kaine, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden.
My ties with the Council run long and deep, stretching way back to my first campaign for the United States Senate. That help has continued throughout my entire career, especially when I was chairman of the United States Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and it continues to this very day.
Now it's much more mainstream with Obama, Clinton, Biden, those policies. Council for a Livable World is, you can't dismiss it as a radical group anymore because it's now center-left, whereas before it had been far-left, even though it hasn't changed its basic views.
In 1994, former Soviet KGB officer Pavel Sudoplatov spilled the beans on Council for a Livable World founder Leo Szilard. Sudoplatov revealed that Leo Szilard had been a fully recruited Soviet agent. Stalin's spy chief Lavrenti Beria had personally ordered that Leo Szilard's political influence was to be exploited to communist advantage. Leo Szilard's mission was to eliminate America's nuclear superiority over the Soviet Union.
So for a group like the Council for a Livable World to exist for decades, scrupulously following the Soviet line, then to have its founder unmasked as a controlled Soviet agent by one of the control officers, that changes the picture completely.
The Council for a Livable World has been able to influence US defense policies for decades. The Council also claims to have influenced several major arms limitation treaties signed with the Soviet Union or Russia, all of which benefited Moscow and damaged the United States. But is this just boasting? How successful has the Council for a Livable World actually been?
From ratifying the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty and START to establishing a nuclear testing moratorium here at home, to the Chemical Weapons Convention, and to this very day, your support and guidance during our recent effort to ratify New START.
So even today, Joe Biden is still working with the Council for a Livable World. He recently appointed Alexandra Bell from the Council to the position of Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of Arms Control. He appointed Mallory Stewart, another Council operative, as Senior Director for Arms Control on the National Security Council. He appointed Spencer Boyer as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Europe and NATO Policy. He appointed Anthony Weir as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of International Security and Non-Proliferation. And he also appointed Colin Kahl as Under-Secretary of Defense for Policy. All of these positions are involved with disarmament, weakening the United States military, right at the time when the United States needs to be standing up to Russia and China. These are the people that Joe Biden has been appointing. Now, as I said before, one of the things that Biden could do is to turn on the energy spigots, get American energy flowing again, sell energy to Europe, help support the Ukraine. That would drop the price of world energy. That would really, really hurt the Russian economy when they need it the most. That's probably the single biggest thing he could do right now, short of sending American troops to Ukraine or enforcing a no-fly zone. But he refuses to do it. As I said before, he wants to buy energy from Venezuela and Iran rather than use American energy. Well, the first thing that Biden did when he came to office was to cancel the pipeline that was running through the Dakotas from Canada to the United States to supply American refineries with Canadian oil. Cancelled it, 11,000 jobs gone, just like that. One of his very first acts of office. Well, the pressure for this had come from the large protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline that had been going on for a couple of years before that. A lot of Native Americans and left-wing Americans were up in the Dakotas protesting this pipeline. It was running across Indian land. It was interfering with sacred areas, etc. Now, the leader of these protests, the organizer of these protests, was a woman called Judith LeBlanc.
My name is Judith LeBlanc. I'm a proud member of the Caddo Nation of Oklahoma and the director of the Native Organizers Alliance. Standing Rock changed everything. We interrupted and disrupted the colonial race-based narrative of what American Indians are, and it will never, never, ever be changed back.
A leading member of the Communist Party USA. She's been involved with the Communist Party since the 70s, about the same time that Biden got into the movement. And she served on the top levels in the Communist Party. She's represented them at the United Nations. She's had her hand kissed by the Palestinian terrorist Yasser Arafat, a very senior communist. We need to understand that the Communist Party USA supports Russia and it supports China. Right now, it's an agency of the Communist Party of China. After the protests, Judith LeBlanc moved into electoral activity. She worked with Native American groups in several key states with high Native American populations, like Minnesota, like Arizona, for instance. And she was there working on the reservations to bring up the Native American vote in those key states, like Nevada, like Minnesota, like Arizona. Because the Native Americans normally lean heavily Democrat, but they vote in very low numbers. So she was out there getting them to the polls. She even arranged a presidential forum in Sioux City, Iowa, where several Democratic contenders spoke to Native American audiences. She got the job done, and as a reward for this, I believe she was allowed to nominate her very good friend, Deb Haaland, to U.S. Secretary of the Interior. Now, Deb Haaland and Judith LeBlanc are very close. Deb Haaland was a second-term congresswoman from New Mexico, a Native American. She has worked with Judith LeBlanc for some time, and Judith LeBlanc mounted a campaign called Deb for the Interior. She got Mark Ruffalo and Sarah Silverman and Cher, a whole bunch of celebrities, even Hanoi Jane Fonda, to get behind this campaign to raise Deb Haaland's profile so this obscure congresswoman from New Mexico could become Secretary of the Interior. So what's the big deal about that? Well, Secretary of the Interior oversees 20% of the North American landmass. That position controls the energy extraction on public lands, gas, natural gas, oil, mining on public lands, forestry, agriculture, all of it, Native American reservations, border areas. It also oversees global warming policy. This is a very crucial position. Somebody in that position has the power to lock up the energy resources in the United States of America just when they are most needed. Now, I have pictures of Deb Haaland marching under the banners of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, a pro-North Korea, pro-China, pro-Russia, pro-Iran Communist Party. She's on the far left. She was put into that secretary's position by a leading member of the Communist Party USA, which supports Russia and China. So just when America needs every single scrap of energy it can get, you have a person in control of a large amount of that energy, someone who's effectively an agent of the Chinese. What could possibly go wrong? And so Joe Biden is refusing to open up the energy reserves, and Deb Haaland is sitting on the energy reserves. It all ties in together. If you think about it right now, if you were Xi Jinping or you were Vladimir Putin, best buddies that they are, you know, Vladimir Putin delayed the invasion of the Ukraine basically so that Xi Jinping could have his moment of glory at the Olympics. Had Putin invaded a little earlier, the ground would have still been frozen and Russian tanks wouldn't have been confined to roads. They could have stormed across fields and through forests where they couldn't be flanked and attacked by the Ukrainian soldiers. As it was, they were trapped in roads and they suffered a lot of casualties. But Putin actually delayed the invasion to suit Xi, so Xi could have his moment of glory. But it doesn't really matter because, even it takes a while. It's designed to be brutal and destructive to teach Europe a lesson. Don't mess with Moscow. So if you were Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin, you'd be looking at America right now, realizing that America is short of energy, even a little bit short of food. America has a very, very weak president who's worked in their interests, the interests of Russia and China and Iran for over 40 years. NATO is very divided, and the US military is at its weakest ebb in decades. The United States hasn't built a nuclear weapon since 1992. The shelf life is 25 years. We don't even know if many of them will work. Meanwhile, Russia and China's nukes are state-of-the-art. They have more than America does. Even Russia has more than America does as far as we can tell. They're state-of-the-art, brand new. They have one nuclear weapon that could take out a state the size of Texas. Their military is professional, it's trained, it's organized. What we've seen in the Ukraine is not really a good indication of the state of the Russian military. Putin has put in there his green troops first, his old equipment first, because he can afford to lose that. What is waiting in the reserves is the brand new equipment and the crack fighting troops. So we're really getting a little bit of a false picture of the Russian military as things stand right now. So America's weak. This is a time to go because the midterm elections come up in November. That could change the US government to a much more conservative and much more willing to take on the Russians type of government. They could make Biden a lame duck. So when would you go? Russia has put the whole world against them right now. They're going to suffer massive damage through sanctions and all sorts of things. Why would they do that for a little bit of the Ukraine? Why would they do that even for the whole Ukraine? They're going for the whole enchilada. This will be Ukraine, then it will be the Baltic states, then there'll be a direct confrontation with NATO, and America will have the choice. Either fight a war that they're not ready to win, or back down and basically give the world balance of power to Russia and China. That's what we're looking at, folks. We need to face that reality. No more la-la land stuff. This is going for the whole shebang right now. So Ukraine is super important, and every patriot needs to stand behind Ukraine. Every bit of help we can give them, every bit of moral support we can give them, every Republican or Democrat Congress that supports Ukraine should be rewarded for that. This is not warmongering, folks. If we don't support Ukraine, we lose Ukraine, we lose Europe, we lose the United States. That's what we're playing for. And we just have to bear in mind that Ukraine once had 1,900 nuclear weapons. That was a very powerful deterrent against Moscow. But Bill Clinton persuaded is a kind word, muscled Ukraine into giving those 1,900 nukes to Russia in exchange a rock-solid guarantee of American protection against Russian aggression. If that protection fails, every American ally will desert this country. And if America thinks it can go it alone without those allies, a delusional thought. So Ukraine is super important for its own sake. 42 million Christians and Jews being faced with subjugation and slaughter and horrible atrocities and eventual conquest, leading to a general assault against the West, or a resolute stand against Moscow right now, that may yet save the day, may possibly save the day. So I hope this has given you an idea of what we're facing here, folks. I don't expect people to believe me. I don't expect people to like what I've had to say. I believe it's the truth, and I believe that you researching this will come to similar conclusions. So we've all got to stand with Ukraine. We've got to absolutely stand with the US military and try and defend it as much as we can. We've got to try and preserve NATO as well as we can. We have to stand together or we shall fall. So thank you for watching. Thank you for spreading this around as far and wide as you can. This is a time where we're going to need divine providence to get us through this, and that will only come if we are brave and faithful and willing to stand up for what is right. So thank you for watching. God bless the brave people of Ukraine, their brave soldiers, their brave President Zelensky. We all have to stand behind them right now. So thanks so much for watching. We'll sign out now and see you next episode.